Welcome back, everyone. We are here with a new episode of The Journey Within. I am honored to say that we have the lovely Ruth Poniarski joining us. I'm going to give a little bit of a blurb before we jump in. So, Ruth jumped out of a window in her PCP-fueled state, and panic overwhelmed her. She believed a revolution was taking place here on Earth and that the Jewish population was leaving Earth on spaceships. The events of that fateful night resulted in a series of mental breakdowns. Ruth now is an accomplished artist. She was eventually diagnosed with psychosis, schizophrenia, severe anxiety, and bipolar disorder. She brilliantly captures her profound journey of learning to live with mental illness in her honest, incredible memoir, Journey of the Self, Memoir of an Artist. I cannot say how grateful I am to connect with Ruth, share energy and space with her, dive deeper into her journey, and really get her message out. Like I mentioned to her earlier before we started recording, this book really spoke to me. And I feel like a lot of the times when we're talking about mental health, it's coming from the doctor's perspective, not from the patient. And man, was this just like I sometimes, I don't remember parts of my stories. So this was kind of like, okay, I don't have to remember everything. So thank you, Ruth, for joining us. Thank you for
having me.
Beautiful book, for sharing your darkest of the darks with us, and for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So
delighted.
So happy to spend time with you. So before we start and we jump on in, I have a little kind of a tradition here on The Journey Within. I love to cosmically profile people. So
okay.
Do you happen to know your horoscope by any chance?
Taurus?
Oh my God, no way.
This month.
Yes. Did your birthday already pass?
Yes, May 12th.
Oh my God, happy late birthday. Oh,
Thank you.
Is so beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, now knowing that you're a Taurus after reading your book, it makes sense. I very much feel
down
that
to
Taurus
earth.
energy. Yes, you're so grounded. Like, even through all the mania and the ups and downs, you were still very grounded. And I feel like that also shows in your art. You bring these images together that are so beautifully. So before we jump into the cover of your book, I would love it if you would share with everyone a little bit about your upbringing, where you grew up. I know that you're a Long Island native, how that was.
Hold on one sec.
Okay.
Hold on. Can't talk now. Sorry about that.
No, that's great.
I'm in my
Keeping
house,
it
in
real.
the basement, and I've got the phone and everything around. But all right, a little bit about my background. I grew up on Long Island in a beach, like a coastal area.
Okay.
And it was a lot of wonderful things I had growing up. I lived near a beach, a community beach, and the neighborhood would get together, and it was a very, young neighborhood and a lot of children, and we played outside different than today, and we were out all day and everything. And then my mother, who was a little bit eccentric, she took me to a life drawing class at the age of 6 years old. She said to me, don't laugh. It was a nude model, a woman. And she said, Ruthie, don't laugh. I want you to, like all of us, were going to be sketching this nude woman. And I did it. I actually got her torso at 6 years old, her torso. And then my concentration kind of wavered. So the rest of the drawing was like a Picasso. Very, very ahead of its time for me.
Oh my God, you were a born artist.
Yeah, it was in me. But my mother always said to me, Ruthie, you have to have a vocation. Art is very hard to make a living at.
Yep. So they're already putting conditioning onto you. Yeah.
Yes, at that point, and I really did. I over the years I would draw a lot of it and doodle a lot of it, and also it made me observe people, like observe the physical environment. I was very tuned into that because of that first class that I had taken.
Yeah.
So that kind of embedded in me an observation of life or perception. So that started very early on.
Wow. 6 years old.
6 years.
So I'm curious, when was your mom's birthday? Now I'm like, what's her horoscope?
Her birthday is April. She's a, what is that?
I feel like she's Aries, right?
Yeah, she's an Aries.
Okay. Oh my God. Yeah. So very ahead of her time, like fiery, eccentric.
Yeah, and very creative. It handed it down to me, her creativity.
Okay.
I mean, she went to the Traphagen School of Design at that time in her youth, and that was designing clothing.
Wow.
And then she could design clothing, and she was an excellent violinist at the age of 10 years old.
Yes.
And she had many, many talents. But she said to me, Ruthie, I saved the writing for you. She goes, I didn't get that talent of writing. I said, Mom, you had that talent of writing, but you never gave yourself a chance. You know, when you begin writing a book, the first thing is you say to yourself, I can't do this. Look at this whole big project. I can't do this. And then you say you have to keep writing every day, keep writing. And then all of a sudden you'll overcome that and say, yes, I can do this.
Wow.
That's what I told my mother. But she did not have nurturing parents. So they didn't guide her and nurture her talents in a positive way.
Yeah.
That she could continue it in her later life. And also the norms of when she got married in 1950. So the norms and the conventions for the women were more, you know, with nothing wrong with it. Be a housewife, take care of your family, you know. She also had operatic talents. And she said to herself, I don't want to pursue opera because I would never have a normal life. Back then, you would not have a normal life. Your whole life would be full of opera and practicing. So she said it's too physically demanding and I can't raise a family. So she decided to put all of her talents aside and pursue a family. That was what she told me.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of background that I had, was a convention, you know.
Yeah, it's not. I'm kind of remembering a little bit about your book because you do talk about your mom was very creative, and she was very attuned to the arts, but because of her own upbringing, it wasn't nurtured. So she kind of was like, no, this is more of a hobby.
Right.
I need to. So that was kind of what the messaging that was passed down to you was.
Absolutely.
You can explore this, but as a hobby, as your passions, you still need to have a career so you can have security and stability.
Yeah, and you know, and paradoxically, it didn't work.
No, that's why I'm like, it's so funny how that was their intention, and you were like, nah, that's just not what I want to do.
Yeah, and then, you know, in high school, I mean, I was very creative, but unfortunately, I don't think a teacher took an interest in me. I didn't have that luck of having a mentor. Never had a mentor. You know, some people are lucky in their path, and they have a mentor that, you know, discovers what they're good at, and they encourage them and that kind of thing. I didn't have that. Okay. Then I chose the most difficult next to medicine field to study, architecture.
Really? Oh my God.
Architecture, because I was good in math, good in physics, and I was good in art and creativity. So I combined all of those, you know, in my mind, I combined everything, and I decided, well, I'll pursue architecture. But meanwhile, I didn't really have a discipline. You really have to, at that age, I wasn't really that disciplined for prolonged periods of time, which you really needed for architecture.
Yeah.
And and then in college, I went to a very difficult technical school. I'm not mentioning any names, but a very difficult technical school. And at that time, it was like 5% women and 95% men. This was back in 1974.
Okay.
And I really discovered a group of friends in the architecture department. You know, I was never really in high school. I was really kind of never really part of any clique or any camaraderie or even having a really close friend. Didn't have that.
So
In college.
I have a question for you. Sorry that I'm interrupting.
Okay.
Because that was something that was, you know, the underlying fear. And this is more of like, now I kind of want to have your husband join the conversation so he can kind of give more, you know, but I've always wondered your biggest thing, and it came up every single time you started to hallucinate and you entered psychosis, was your fear of abandonment.
Yes.
So if I know that you didn't have, you know, you're talking about this time, you didn't have that kind of cliquey friend group when you were growing up. Were there other things that attributed to that abandonment wound?
Well, my mother, God bless her, she meant well. She had her issues.
Our parents do the best that they can.
They do the best they can. However, she wasn't really huggy and comforting and say, Ruthie, it'll be okay. And my father, the same way. He wasn't really like, and they never said, oh, Ruthie, you're so beautiful, or you're so good at this, or I never had anything like that. And I, you know, when I raised my kids, I made sure that I would do that.
Yeah.
And that was so conscious. So when but to get back to
college,
I made a group of creative students from my class. We only had a group of 60 students for the architecture program, very small, 60 students.
Okay.
In the whole school, I mean, there were 5 years, so 5 times 60, there was 300. However, the attrition rate was very high. Really? By the time my class graduated, there were only 13 that graduated. People dropped out, they went to different programs, they couldn't take it.
Wow.
And also in that time, I'll jump a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
It was the post-Vietnam era. The Vietnam era was very gray. In that era, the goal-oriented and discipline were not practiced as much as the previous generation. Drugs, getting out of the war, revolting, revolution, all of that. So that was like I was in the aftermath of that, 1974. So I discovered this group, we became very friendly group. And then we would have little parties and smoke marijuana.
Okay.
Now my sophomore year, in the beginning, I had smoked marijuana one time so much I blacked out.
Oh wow.
I blacked out.
Okay.
I was like in a blackness, no dream, no nothing. Okay. 4 hours later, I woke up and I said, oh my God, I woke up. I didn't think I would wake up from this.
Yeah.
So for that moment on, I veered away from this group. Mm-hmm. And I went cold turkey, no smoking marijuana. Mm-hmm. I didn't drink that much, but a casual drink. No smoking a cigarette, which I never really did. But I really, you know, I try to veer towards inadvertently. This wasn't conscious. I just did this.
Yeah.
And then I really had because of that marijuana, it made me paranoid. It made me a little isolated. Mm-hmm. And those fears of abandonment were always underlying in me. Mm-hmm. And then my junior year, I had dropped design. Design was the core class for the program. I had dropped that and admitted myself into an art studio class, along with all the technical courses. Mm-hmm. I had gone into take this art studio course, which I did very well at. And then, but I felt failing that I dropped the design. The design was like the whole core of the whole, really the whole school. And it was where you would be with the studio of all the students and my peers. So I kind of isolated myself in that regard also. Then and then the summer came. I don't remember what I did that summer offhand, but 1977, I came back. Oh yeah, my boy. I had a boyfriend in the spring of my junior year. My junior year. He was a world traveler. His family. It mentioned in the book a little bit. He was a world traveler. His parents and his siblings are all over the globe. But he came to this school, this architecture school. So, and he was very artistic. We were really very alike. But I was still going through this paranoia, so underneath it all. And I couldn't really connect with him emotionally, even though I knew that this was a really good relationship in a way, but I wasn't really emotionally involved in it. Evolved.
You weren't emotionally available either because of that core abandonment wound, I'm guessing.
Yeah, because of all that went on, I just couldn't connect with him.
For sure,
Even though we did connect on a certain level, but not on an emotional, deeper
like you
level.
put up a wall almost to protect yourself, unconsciously.
Unconsciously, yes. Yeah. So anyway, so then we spent our summers. I think I went to a camp. And I didn't do well at camp. I mentioned it, and I was ostracized at the camp because I went in the month of the second term of the summer, the August session.
Okay.
And I tried to be a sub-counselor to a group of 10-year-old girls. Okay. And the sub-counselor before me had been in July, and she had left. Oh. So these girls were tough, and I never put two and two together. And they weren't nice to me, and they ostracized me, and they picked on me as their counselor. I left. I just dropped it and left. I said, I'm not going to stay here. Yeah. So anyway, that was an experience. And then that didn't bode well with me either. Underneath it all, even with all of what's going on, that just added fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
Then I returned, and then I was supposed to go to France for a year. But I canceled that because I said, you know what, that was a pipe dream. I'm not fluent in French. I would have a problem going to take a course in France. So I didn't go to France. Went back to the college, and I pursued, and I signed up again for design course.
Okay.
And when in the course, I couldn't concentrate enough. I couldn't get past the initial stage of designing a building. I would make a sculptural building. I couldn't do the drawings. I had setbacks. I just was very frustrated. Befriended this male who was once a student in the program. He did a PhD work, and he was working for a professor, and I befriended him. And he wanted more in the relationship than I wanted to give. I liked him as a friend. I wasn't ready to engage and be intimate with him. He had a little party where his roommate was a PhD student, PhD for physics. So very, very, very educated. He had other students, PhD physics students there. And I call him Joseph in the book. Joseph, this friend of mine who wanted more, in his little apartment, he had this little get together, and I was close enough with him. I was a close friend, so everybody left, and he was there because it was his apartment with his roommate, and we were talking. And during the party, this is the beginning of the book, the very beginning. During the party, I didn't eat because I was talking so much to all these students. I had so much to talk about with physics students. So anyway, he noticed that I didn't, and I was kind of hungry. So he gave me this brownie cake that was laced with angel dust.
Oh, God.
And from that moment, I ate the whole brownie. I hallucinated a bed of white candles, wanted to jump out the window, but I didn't. I laid down on the bed and kind of cooled down for about a half an hour to an hour, got up and I left, went to my car, and then the psychosis kicked in. I became paranoid. I felt like I was going to be abandoned by my Jewish people. I hallucinated that there was a revolution going on. The capitalists against the socialists. This is back in 1977, not far-fetched from today.
No, that's why I was so intrigued by all of this, because I'm like, these hallucinations and the fears, they don't come out of thin air. Like it's been told. There's something in there that you're holding on to that you then turn it into reality, because like as I'm reading the book, I start doing research about the time, and I'm like, she's not off. Like there has to be a connection with all of this.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And the connection also, I was taking a course at my program in the school called where they had what socialism and the government of socialism, how their architecture is designed and affected by a socialistic country.
Ruth,
so that
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do you think that if you wouldn't, and I'm sure you've gone through this in your head multiple times, but I'm curious as to, because I had something similar. I'm like, I wonder if it's just the drugs made it so now your brain can't work the way that it was meant to. But I feel like, I genuinely feel like there's nothing wrong with our brains. It's just something happens that then it's like the electric circuit's off. But like, where I'm going with this is, I feel like you were ahead of your time, and then the angel just kind of did this.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I always give this example. Can you imagine Albert Einstein had he taken angel dust or heroin?
Yes.
Can you imagine him?
Oh my God.
Because I have a brain like that.
That's how I
physics. I have a brain that dreams. I have a brain that imagines, and a brain that goes off the radar. And this just tipped it. Plus the marijuana, though. It was the marijuana and then the angel dust the following year. That really, the whole combination of that. And plus, I did have a predisposition.
Well, I mean,
however, had I not done the marijuana and the angel dust, I think I would have ended up in therapy, but not psychosis that developed.
That's where I go, because like my hard time with accepting mental illnesses that you have a chemical imbalance is epigenetics. I don't know if you've done research on epigenetics, but epigenetics basically says that our genes are no longer genetic. They're also influenced by our environment. So that's where I start thinking, I'm like, could this be handled in a way where you're not hallucinating, you're not experiencing psychoses, but we haven't been able to grasp things quickly enough that they escalate, and by the time we're going to help the person, we're far from that point. Oh,
I'm sorry. Hello? I don't know where all these people are coming. Anyway.
I don't know if that's something that but I've never identified as crazy. I've always felt like what you just said with Albert Einstein. I'm like, I feel like my brain and my mind and the way that I think is way ahead of where reality is right now. And I had the upbringing, literally, it's like I'm the candidate for trauma bonding, for enmeshment, for codependency, for all of these things, that then I start wondering, is it really that I have a chemical imbalance, or is it just that my environment made it so that I am the perfect candidate for these things? And because we're not ahead of things, science is changing so much all the time. Like what's true today is not true tomorrow, that by the time that we can help the person, we're past that point of going back? Do you get what I'm saying? Because like, I'm like, as I'm reading this book, I'm like, man, if she wouldn't have, I kind of want to go to Joseph, you ruined my Albert Einstein. Like, I could have had, do you know what I mean?
I think learning all this, a couple of things are going on. I think part of it's environmental.
Okay.
Part of it is genetic.
Yeah.
And the gestalt, the whole rapture of everything together, all the events that happen around you and in you.
Yeah.
And then your brain has a pattern of how it behaves and reacts to stress.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
The psychosis that I had.
Was your body coping with the stress and the traumatic of what was happening?
Stress that I had, my boyfriend didn't return to college. I was alone, isolated, plus the drugs, plus I just developed, I was not in the gestalt or the pattern of disciplining myself and problem solving and taking one thing at a time and analyzing it and solving your problems. Life is problem solving. This is what I've learned. Life is you get problem solving for each thing that comes in your life. The stress is in your life. If you're not consciously analyzing and doing that, it could become a psychosis.
Yeah.
And then the psychosis becomes a pattern.
Yeah.
And then we're creatures of habit. And I think the wiring of the brain becomes a habit and a pattern.
But that's just
what
it.
happened.
It's a learned behavior. It's not necessarily that there's something broken with us. It's, you just said, it's a pattern, it's a habit. So it's a learned pattern, a learned habit. You can unlearn that.
Yeah, and then in the stresses, you to that habit of how you handle it in your head.
For sure. And a lot of the time it's, you're not giving the tools when you're younger to self-attune, to self-regulate, which are things that, you should be able to regulate yourself. But if going back to, and I'm using your case just to make this a little bit more, so people are understanding, your mom didn't have that nurturing family upbringing. So she wasn't able to give that on to you, because we can only give what we ourselves have been given and what we ourselves know. So I mean, I'm going through all of this, and you're probably like, yes, Andre, I've gone through this all my life. But it's just more of, I look at it like, I remember reading about Van Gogh when I was younger. And everyone was like, how crazy. And I'm like, how brilliant. And everyone looked at me like, he cut off his ears. How is that brilliant? I'm like, man, do you know what it's like to be committed to your art so much that you want to cut off your ears? Like, I don't. Yeah. That's how I viewed it. So like, I've always viewed all these things that people view as crazy and just like unreal. I'm like, no, that I could see, I mean, I might not do it, but I could see, like, I have respect.
Absolutely.
We're like.
And also, what was going through his brain, you don't know.
I don't know. I don't know if he thought if he cut off his ears. Well, because like, I remember that for me, you were thinking that if spaceships, if you went to sleep, everyone was going to be gone. So that was your biggest thing with going to sleep.
Yeah, and I couldn't go to sleep.
Yeah, which is like,
and that developed. That's sleep deprivation.
I literally reading your book and I want to kick the psychiatrist that you have. Like, what are you doing, dude? Yeah. But
also, though, the pattern also is the sleep deprivation, and that became compounded over time. I went through, in the book, I went through 7 days without sleep.
Well, I mean,
anybody with 7 days without sleep wouldn't be sane.
That's what I say. I'm like, when people say, they're like, oh, but you have psychosis, and I'm like, well, I haven't slept. I'm sure that if you take 2 other people from my college and you don't let them sleep for 2 weeks, the same thing would happen. But it was that my thing, while you were scared to fall asleep, I needed to give someone my blood so that they would leave me alone and I could save humanity. So that's why I'm like, it's so interesting these narratives that we have, and the outside world can say, no, that's not going to happen. But you're like, no, it is. There's something in here that's telling me this will happen. And it's not talked about a lot. Like there was a girl in the psych ward that she thought she could fly. And I remember telling my psychiatrist, I'm like, one of my biggest fears is, what if I think I can fly? And she's like, so? And I'm like, so then I try to fly. And
Look
she's
at
like,
Superman.
yeah. And then
What happened to
didn't
Superman?
understand that fear. I'm like, I'm scared that I'm going to want to fly one day. And she's like, why would you? And I'm like, why would you not want to fly? Like, this is where we have an issue, where I think I might want to, and you are questioning why I would. And it wasn't until I met a doctor that was like, question everything. If someone tells you I want to fly, then go, why would you and why wouldn't you? If you can look at it everything like that, then you're not going to look at everything like a fact. And just the way my brain works, if everything's a hard-on fact, I continue to ask until I can prove it. And if I can't, then I disregard you because I'm like, oh, you don't make sense.
Well, that's like you could say I fly. You're not going to stand at the window and fly out the window.
And fly out the window, but it's going to be kind of like I'm reading, I'm giving away your book. I hate that I'm doing this, but as you're doing the very specific part where you didn't jump off the window, like in your brain.
No, I didn't.
It makes sense.
But what happened was, and that was the key episode that led me to the right doctor in the book. What happened was I went to this psychological workshop, which I
my
described.
I have to. I'm just
my psychiatrist at that time didn't say, Ruthie, cut your stimulus. Too much stimulus in your life. Too much creating an overabundance of stress. Cut it. He didn't say that. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll find a cure and I'll go to this workshop. Maybe I'll do this. I went to the workshop. It was deadly. I was stressed out. Forget it. I didn't return to it. And then I couldn't get sleep over it. And then one thing led to another. And each night I couldn't sleep. And I didn't sleep for 7 days and 7 nights. And the apartment next to me, I was in a 3rd floor apartment, and they were doing construction and they had drilling. And I thought they were going to come in. They were going to murder me, persecute me. And so that was the reason. It wasn't like I thought I could fly or I'm going to end my life. It wasn't that at all. When I came to the window to escape this, it's the story in my head. It's a story.
That's where I'm like, how many people have stories in their head that no one's listening to? And then there's a disconnect. Because from the outside, people are like, oh, she's crazy. How can she do this? But as I'm reading this, I'm like, no, this makes like full-on sense.
Yeah, it's almost like the craziness is a norm. It's like a norm. It's almost like you're living with, let's say, low-grade depression.
Yeah.
Which is not good.
No.
But it's the norm for you, and you're living with it, and you don't think to seek outside of it. It becomes a norm. That's the book. The whole thing is like, it's a norm within me. It's like a norm of the situation. It's normal. You don't think it's so, because you're in my head.
It's how I felt, because most of the time people don't take you into their head. They're just kind of sharing the experience, and you really took us into how you were feeling. And this was something that I was like even thinking about. I'm like, you didn't share a lot of this with your doctor, because there was also fear of what he would think if you shared this.
But not only that, but the first psychiatrist I had, he was remiss on discovering or consciously being aware of my psychosis and the pattern it would take each time I had a very, very stressful thing happen in my life. Then there was a pattern. I wouldn't get sleep. I would walk out the house. I would do this. I would do that. But it all initiated with no sleep. And he never asked me, are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? How are you eating? The very necessities, the basics, he never, and the common sense of the basics, he never addressed to me outwardly. He never, that the kind of therapy he had was almost a Freudian therapy, where
That's
he
where I
wouldn't
was going to
say
go
anything.
with. I
He
kind of
wouldn't
want to
say
be
anything.
like,
He would let me associate or talk. I would talk about the same thing. I never got ahead of it. I didn't ever really got into things nitty gritty with him. I didn't have that relationship. It was not that relationship. And until I had that devastating accident,
yeah, that then sent you through all
after
of
that,
this.
the hospital that I was in, I'm not going to mention names,
No,
the
that's fine.
rehabilitation hospital I was in New York, contacted this psychiatrist on Long Island, and George, that was
Yeah.
his name, George. He came into my life. He was a Quaker. I didn't say this in the book. He was a Quaker
Mm-hmm.
and a veteran of World War II.
Oh, wow.
Self-made man.
Wow.
Very common sense.
Yeah.
Very common sense. Shared with me advice. Shared with me. He included my parents and family in therapy, whereas the other doctor didn't, excluded my support system, because the only support system I had in the beginning was my parents, because I couldn't share this with my friends because I didn't think they would accept me. I thought that I was a pariah, and they would like look down on me and stigmatize me because of what I was going through.
Well, I thought it was kind of crazy that he was pushing you to not count on them. And I mean, with everything that we know of enmeshment and codependency, yeah, I could see it, but at the same time, I'm like, she has no support system. She needs a support system. And you're basically like, no, do it on your own.
Yeah, he said, I want you to be independent.
Yeah.
Be independent. And that was the wrong message.
Oh, God.
Totally.
Well, I mean, when you went to Greece, I was like reading the book sweating. I'm like, how? And I say this because I remember when I wanted to take my first trip after being out of the hospital, my doctor was like, you can go an hour and a half away. And I'm like, that's not a trip. And she's like, yeah, it is. You haven't been further than your mom in 2 years. That's a trip. And I'm like, okay. And it was checking in 6 times a day. And it was necessary. But I remember, I was calling her and, hey, I woke up. Did you eat? Yeah. Did you take your medication? Yeah. What are you going to do now? I don't know. Okay. I want you to write down 3 things so that you feel secure, and then just see what happens. And it was constantly that. And what I think it's funny is, my codependency didn't start when I was young. I was very independent when I was young. My codependency started with my therapist. And I'm grateful for this, because a lot of people, you had this with, what's his name? Morris. You had that kind of codependency with Morris in your book. I'm glad that it went from my doctors to my mom, and it never went to a partner. But that's something I struggled with when I was 26 for the first time in my life, making decisions for myself. And people were like, what do you mean? I'm like, I've had to ask a doctor if I can watch a movie. What do you mean? I'm like, is it too stimulating? Like, I remember my doctor wanted to kill me. I watched Homeland. It's about a CIA agent, and she's bipolar. Oh my God. I was like, I don't know how no one figured out that I was binge watching this on Netflix. This was like 5-6 years ago or something like that. And I show up to my appointment, and I'm like, yeah, so do you think that maybe there's people hiding places? And my doctor's like, people hiding places? I'm like, yeah, I think there's people hiding places. They're listening to my conversations because they want to give the information back to the government. And she's like, what are you reading? Nothing. What are you watching? Oh, there's a show on Netflix called Homeland. No. When did I say you could watch this? So, I went from a very sheltered, I need to ask my therapist, can I watch this? Can I read this book? Can I eat this? Because I couldn't eat grapefruit because it interacted with my medication. Like, all of these things that people don't talk about. And then go off into the world. And this is something I tell my doctor sometimes. I'm like, you kind of just were like, fly, birdie, fly. And you forgot that I had been relying on you for everything for the last 6 years. And you just expected me to fly and be an adult. And I had no idea how to, because you guys didn't let me. It was like, I didn't even I didn't even know, oh, did I take my medication? It was like, since they were always handed to me, I wasn't taking responsibility for my recovery. And when that happened, I hated my therapist. I called her all the time. I'm like, I hate you. You ruined me. I can't adult. I don't know how to be a human. And she's like, yes, you do. You're 15. You're not 25. And you're struggling because 25-year-olds do all these things that you haven't been able to do. So it was this whole new thing. And that's why when I was reading your book about Greece, I'm like, how can they just let her go to Greece?
Not only that, I went to Paris.
I'm like,
I went to Finland.
Like, what? By herself? I was like, Ruth. I'm like, Ruth, are you okay? Are you okay, Ruth? I like skipped a couple pages and I'm like, okay, she made it. I'm like suffering as I'm reading this book. And at the end, I had to like constantly tell myself, she's alive, because she wouldn't have written this book if she wasn't. She's good. You're reading the beginning of it. Like, I had to tell myself that because it was so close to home.
Yeah.
You know, it was so close to home that I yelled at your therapist. I yelled at your doctor. I was like, what are you doing? And then I would want to hug your dad and say, yeah. And then kind of tell your mom, like, I'm sorry. Like, it was just, your book took me through a lot of emotions in such a beautiful way.
I feel very good about that.
Yeah.
I feel really good absolutely. I feel great.
I'm glad that, you know,
I want to fly.
You want to fly, don't you? So kind of with that, now that everyone, I feel like we're diving too deep into the book and I want people to read it. Would you talk about the cover? Because this
the cover
is
sort of reminiscent of me, the Madonna with a wreath around me, a wreath. And I'm holding an ancient baby. The baby, I'm holding my ancient self. I'm holding myself. And the poem in the beginning, it says, I sail between two worlds. You're between what you are going to do, the future, and here you're in between two worlds. And you fear you fear the place that you're going to from the place that you know.
You're incredible. Like, I need to say this because you probably have said this to, you know, your little self 1,020,000 times, but thank you for going back and sharing your story. I cannot imagine, and that was my next question. I can't imagine going back and having to kind of relive all of this almost. How was the experience of writing your memoir?
Oh, great.
Oh, was it therapeutic?
Great. It was like a catharsis. I wrote it. Okay, this is what I want to mention. I wrote it, and then after I finished it, and by the way, I had to edit it for 1.5 years. However, it was originally 400 pages.
Oh my God, I would want to read that book. I'm like, I'll read the 400-page book.
400 pages went from my birth to 1987.
Yeah.
So I decided, and the editor said, you know, this is too long.
Mm.
You know, you have to really make it more concise and more, less long. Really, yeah. It was too long.
Yeah.
So I started with the first break, which was in 1977. But writing this, I was able to put myself in a bubble and look at myself from afar. Look at the patterns. Really look at them. And really observe all the patterns that you went through. And then now, if I find myself going into whatever,
yeah,
I know what to do. I talk, I take a little extra medicine. You know, I know beforehand.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't had anything, knock wood, since 2010. Since 2010. So, I mean, what happened was I had a multitude between 1977 and 1987. After the right doctor, I found it was still there. It
Yeah.
became less and less and less. So if you make a graph, breakdowns were like this, and then like this, like this, like that.
Okay. Wow.
And it took many years to find the right medicine. And I will tell fellow sufferers, if one medicine doesn't work, don't wait years, try another medicine. If the first therapist you're with is not effective over a period of time, try another therapist. Don't wait years.
Yeah.
You have to be conscious of that. If you're even today, if you're a novice, you don't know much about it, and you find yourself in this situation, you have to know enough that if your help is not effective, you have to know to try something else. It's trial and error.
Yeah.
I was given the right medication in the late 1990s, because back then, in 1977, medications were not that varied.
That's where I was going to go with.
Haldol.
We've had so many different things change.
Today is a lot of different medications for bipolar, for a number of things, and for antidepressants, and they kind of run parallel to one another.
Yeah.
But in the late 1990s, I was hospitalized, and the doctor there gave me a medication and started to work.
Really?
But I didn't take it worked, but I still had episodes. And then finally, when I was in the hospital again, they increased the dosage to 20 milligrams from 5 milligrams.
Oh, wow.
And knock wood, worked.
It worked. Wow.
Worked. 30 years to find the right dosage of the medicine, 20 years to find the right medicine.
Wow. Can I ask if it was an antipsychotic or a mood
stimulant? Zyprexa.
Okay, all right.
Which is olanzapine.
Yeah, I like to. I mean, I know not everyone likes to share, but just for my own, I'm always intrigued.
This would be very helpful to. There are a lot of people that suffer and can't even verbalize it or put it in front of them as a problem to solve.
Yeah,
they don't look at that way.
And then I have a question, and this is a little selfish one, just because I thought, I'm like, wow, full circle, what an interesting thing. You end up marrying a psychiatrist.
Yes.
So the reason I just
hear this.
I need to hear this, because part of me was like, and I just need to, how did you not feel, and this is why I said this is a selfish thing. When I'm around eccentric people, I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry about it. That's fine. They get me. But when I'm around people that are very just more, I feel like, oh man, I'm not going to fit in here. I have to kind of start drawing in between the lines when I've never drawn in the lines. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, I need to know, what?
Yeah.
Didn't that come up? Oh, he's going to think I'm just curious.
Well, at the time I met him, I was going to switch gears. I mentioned in the book, I was interested in being a social worker.
Yeah.
Because I had been through so much, I knew what the other side of the coin was. I knew it. I know the ropes, and I would really be very helpful to somebody going through anything, really. I mean, mine was the top, but people are going through a lot of things, stresses in life, and they don't know how to deal with it. I thought about that. So when I had met him, I met him through a dating service. So then we were ahead of our time too.
Yeah.
Ahead of our time.
So ahead of you. Wait, when's his birthday?
His is December 23rd.
Capricorn. Oh my God, did you guys find each other? Oh, okay. I need to hear the story. I'm so intrigued.
So he came to my apartment, and the first thing he says, Rita? I said, oh, no, my name is Ruth. Oh. Anyway, so we met, and I was very, I wasn't going through anything. It was very nice. He was a very nice guy, a gentleman. And the other people that I met, you read in the book, they were not really gentlemen in a way. They're not gentlemen. Yeah. And I had learned by then to distinguish even on the first meeting, the kind of guy he is, manners and sincerity and, not just for him, wasn't just for him.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
We went out. The first date, we went to a restaurant. The second date, I was going through something, and we went to an Indian restaurant. I didn't say a word the whole night. And he's going to himself, boy, what is this? I'm talking, he didn't know what to make of it at all, So he drives me back to my apartment, gives me a kiss on the cheek, holds the door for me. I thought I would never see him again. I was still going through one of my periods. I would have like little triples, little what's called little episodes, like ripples between big ones, ripples. Where I wouldn't sleep, I would get a half sleep or whatever. I would get a little paranoid, a little anxious, fear of abandonment, the whole 9 yards, but ripples. Anyway, the third date, he said, we're going to a movie. This way I'd have to talk. So we went to a movie, we kissed, we had dinner, and then I forgot the fourth date. But anyway, like the fifth or sixth date, I said, if you want to get intimate, we have to have we have to be serious. This is what I had learned, not that I was intimate with a lot of people, I wasn't. Yeah. But I had a very severe conscience about it. And that's another whole issue to talk about, women having a severe conscience about their sexuality, which is not talked about.
No, that's another one. I'm like, Ruth, you and I can talk forever.
Feminism is not talked about.
No, it's not. Well, like and I'm going to interrupt your story a little bit, but I was talking to someone the other day and I don't know if it's my eccentric, bipolar Gemini mind or what, but I was conditioned to be ashamed of my breast. My family's Colombian, and I got my period when I was very young, so my boobs started to show at a very young age, and I didn't know what to do with it because I was like 10, 11. I still played with Barbies. And if I showed them, then adults would tell me, you're trying to provoke boys. And it's like, what? And if I didn't, then they would also say something to me. So it was a very, very bizarre thing, because then I got older, and then it wasn't just the adults, it was also the peers around me saying stuff. Now though, as I'm more comfortable in my body,
right,
I don't like clothes.
Okay.
So I'm not saying I walk around naked, but if I'm in my house, I like to be naked. I love spending time in nature. Stimulation is a very big thing for me. I love being around people, but then I start realizing when I'm alone that I keep repeating conversations, and that's my way of, I need to take time for me. I need to go into nature. I need to recharge and not be around so much stuff. So I spend a lot of time in nature, and I love taking my clothes off and just walking around in nature naked. And I was talking to someone about that, and they're like, aren't you embarrassed that someone will see you? And I'm like, well, if you see a man without his shirt, you don't think anything twice. Versus a woman, right, you want to now sexualize my body when I'm just doing the same thing a man is doing.
Right.
It's the same thing. I'm like, and the only difference is because I'm able to feed another human being versus he's not. But I've seen men that have just as much boobs as I do, and they're walking around without shirts and no one's saying anything to them. So Colorado, Denver specifically, you can walk around topless and it's not considered nudity. And I've been getting to that place where I'm like, all right, I don't care about society. I'm just going to do it for me. But I was having this conversation with someone, and they're like, you're trying to get attention. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to move away from how men and women sexualize women's bodies, when the reality is we create life. And you're trying to pervert it and turn it into something dirty. And that's why so many girls don't feel comfortable in their body, don't feel comfortable talking about pleasure. Like,
You feel dirty.
You feel dirty. And that was the thing for me. Like I was reading Chelsea Handler's book, and she talks about when she was like 8 with her friends masturbating, but they didn't know what they were doing. And as I'm reading this book, I start to like cringe, and I feel like I'm by myself and I'm reading this book. Why do I feel like crawling out of my skin? And that's when I had to realize, oh my God, when I was little, I was very intrigued by bodies. So I'd go up to kids and I'm like, do you have a boy pee-pee or a girl pee-pee? And the teacher got mad at me because she's like, you can't go up to people and ask them that. And I'm like, why? I can't just pull their pants down. So I have to ask them what they have. And
Right.
she's like, no, that's not allowed. That's inappropriate. So it's like, it was recognizing all of these conditionings that were
These
put
conventions
up, that are
like,
put on
that are
kids.
put on, yeah.
You don't talk to a
on
little
you.
girl and you're like, hey, look, there's a time and place to talk to people about privates.
This is also what I wanted to say before. I think that high schools and junior high schools should have a course on how to take care of yourself.
They don't.
That would include everything from relationships to problem solving to handling money.
Oh, well, that's one thing I was saying. I'm like, I was at the mall a couple years ago and I saw Kay's Jeweler, and I don't like to throw people out under the bus, but I'm going to do it because I think it's messed up. But they're just telling little kids like, hey, do you want to get a credit card? And it's like, they don't know that if they don't use this credit card, it's ruining their credit. And you're taking advantage of a child that doesn't know any better. Schools really need to teach them this. I never
did everything, even how to cook and keep a house, and manage your time. And,
oh my God,
study. They should have that. Even in college. They should have it.
Well, they should, because what they're expecting is for parents to pass that on. But what we don't.
Parents sometimes can't, even if they're great parents, they can't do that.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about it. My mom was a single mom with 2 kids. She did the best that she could with what she had, and I mean, she was all over the place when we were growing up, but we also had this sense of you have to do it yourself because it's just mom and us.
I mean, I brought up myself.
You know, so it's like all these things where it's like, you can't just assume because you have a parent that your parents are giving you everything. A lot of the times, like, this was something I was talking to my mom about. Her approach growing up was, if we ever fell, was wipe your knees and keep going. And while that's a good thing to teach, I took it to an extreme, being me. I took it to that means every time something happens, I just, wipe my and keep going. So I don't allow myself to feel things. So if I'm sad, I just keep going. And then, 3 months later, I'm crying and I don't know why. And that was part of my patterning that I had to recognize. And when I was able to recognize that, I was like, oh, I don't cry. And then it was like, oh, my mom doesn't cry. So she passed that on to me. And I always thought that made me cool. I don't cry. And it was like, no, it's not cool that you don't cry. There's all these mixed.
It's like a holistic kind of a whole picture is not brought about or taught.
It's not.
It's not.
It's
and
not.
Even today, with all of our advances with this therapy and that therapy,
it's still not.
It's still not addressed. It should be addressed in high school and in junior high. And even in junior high, that's really when, the patterns start to coalesce, to start.
Well, especially with like there's things that we experience in childhood that we don't think are gonna affect us, are gonna traumatize us, and they do. Like, this was something I've been dealing with, and I didn't even know where it came from. I feel like anytime I'm around blondes, I have to like get small, and I didn't know why. And I've been doing a lot of inner child work. And when I finally went down to it, I was in like 3rd grade, and I didn't color in between. I didn't color in lines. I colored however I like to color. And there was this girl that I wanted to color with. And she had blonde pigtails, like the Shirley Temple pigtails, like that, and blue eyes. And she wore those dresses with like the little short shorts. My mom, I wore overalls and like shirt, and I had like bangs and a bob, and I had brown hair. So, I would ask her, can I color with you? And she said, no, you don't color pretty. And the teacher, instead of saying, there's different ways of coloring, she said, you color messy. Why don't you color over here? And I took that like, oh, I'm not enough to now color with her. And
Yeah.
that small incident shaped such like, and it was already a thing, because if you look
Absolutely.
at my dad has that inferiority. He's Hispanic, he immigrated, so he's always trying to not look Colombian and Hispanic and not have an accent, and what can I have so that I look American and I don't look like, a different person. So I had a lot of, let me just make myself what everyone else is like so I don't stick out. And it wasn't until I saw this doctor that I'm very grateful for, because she finally told me, she's like, you're mad at the world for something that they didn't do. They didn't give you your diagnosis. Stop being mad at the world. Your upbringing, your parents, you've experienced a lot of trauma, but the world didn't do this to you. No one's punishing you. And it was the first time that someone had addressed that, because I was an angry child, very angry, because I wasn't allowed to feel. So then, it turned into a lot of just, I blamed everything on everyone else. Well, it's not fair that this person doesn't have to do this. I have to do so much just to wake up in the morning, and they don't have to do that. They just get to go. Or like, I would get mad about the mood chart. Oh my God, the freaking mood chart would drive me crazy. I'm like, how come I have to fill this mood chart and no one else has to fill it? And for the first time, this doctor addressed, and she's like, your inner child wants all of these questions answered, and you keep ignoring her. And it was the first time that someone acknowledged her and acknowledged everything that she was wondering. And when I started to look at things from her perspective, I was able to actually get closure from a lot of things, because we try to look at things from an adult, and it's like, well, why are you crying? Stop being, and it's like, there's a little kid in you that's calling the shots. And that little kid is not going to respond to, grow up, you just got to grow up, because that's probably what your parents were telling you, and it didn't work. So it was,
no, instead of isolating the little incidences and talking about them, it's just in a big mass,
Yeah, so that's why.
And so anyway, so George.
Oh God, George.
In the book, he said, take one thing at a time, one thing. And he's always said, don't put bunions in your head. Don't think 30 years ahead of yourself. That's what I used to do. I would think 30 years ahead, and I was abandoned.
Yep.
30 years, I was like in a desolate world, and that's what disrupted my sleep continually. And the first doctor, Dr. Samuels, I called him.
Yeah.
He didn't catch on to the pattern of my thoughts, of my psychosis. 7 years. 7 years.
You know what? I'm curious if there's still doctors like that. There has to be.
Yeah, look, this doctor that I had could have been good for moderately ill patients.
Well, I
was more than moderate. I was much more. It developed into something much more high risk.
Well, I mean, the reason I view this is I remember the first psychiatrist that diagnosed me first told me that I was depressed and put me on antidepressants and sent me off to college. So here I am, a college freshman on antidepressants. I go into a mania, and I'm not sleeping. And it's like, the way that I tell people, I'm like, you're a college freshman and you're not sleeping. That's the best thing in the world, because now I can go to classes and I can do all of this, and I can also hang out with my friends, because now I have more hours in the day than everyone else. And it probably lasted like a week before everyone was like, what are you on? You can't keep up a conversation. You're like talking about 3 million things at once. I couldn't stay still to watch TV. Like, my roommates at the time hated me because I would take everything out of my room and clean it with a toothbrush in the middle of the night, because I just had so much energy. And
Me too.
that's where I was like, no one ever addressed that. And then it wasn't until I went from there to being ultra paranoid around everything around me. Why? I couldn't sleep. And I had friends that were like, hey, try smoking pot. That might make you get tired. And I'm like, sure. You seem to be tired all the time. Okay. That was my way of kind of making sense of all of that. And kind of in your direction, I went into that paranoia state where I started getting scared of everything. I ended up medically withdrawing from school, went back home, was rightfully diagnosed. But then this is where I say I was smarter than my doctor.
Yeah.
Because I manipulated the situation to my advantage. While I was there, I did everything that he told me to. But after a month, I'm like, I don't like being on medication. This makes me zone out. I don't feel anything. I love to cook, and now I don't want to cook. I don't want to be around people. And I couldn't say anything to him because I felt like if I say something, then I'm going to get in trouble. And that was my biggest thing. I can't say anything because I'm going to get in trouble. And that goes back down to my childhood of kids are supposed to be seen, not heard. My dad was very much shut up, stop questioning, stop saying anything, be quiet. So I wouldn't say anything. And then when time to go back to school, my mom was like, you're not ready. I think you need to stay here. Let's like continue this. I told the doctor, my mom's crazy. She's trying to manipulate me. She doesn't want to let me grow. And I touched everything that I knew would get him to let me go. And he's like, she's ready to go. Let her go. Let her go. I went to school and I would take the medication one day. And that was my brain. I'm like, oh, if I take it, sometimes it'll keep me good, but then I won't be so boring. And then I had a friend say, what's wrong with you? Why are you so boring? You're not your bubbly, energetic self. Okay, let me take less of it. So now I'll only take it like once or twice a week. Or I'll only take it if I can't sleep. And as you know, you can't do that. So and I think back, I'm like, I needed someone that outsmarted me. And I outsmarted a lot of my doctors at the beginning. It wasn't until I had a doctor that I remember I had a very bad thing where I didn't like what you said, I would walk out. And she told me, if you walk out that door, you're not walking back in. And that was the first person that ever set a boundary for me. And I'm like, what? And she's like, if you walk out that door, you're not walking back in.
Wow.
And I don't know who's going to see you. And at that moment, I'm like, that my abandonment wound kicked in. I'm like, oh, you can't abandon. I can abandon you, but you can't abandon me. So I was like, okay. And I sat down and she picked up on, it's not the best way, but there's certain fears that will keep her from pushing. And that was how she started to break things down. But I look back, I'm like, if I didn't have someone that could kind of push back, I would have never gotten the help that I needed because I always felt like I was calling the shots. Like I was the one in charge. I'm the one driving and you're just here next to me whenever I want you
George
to say something.
too, when I first came to George, he says, you got to slow down. Can't do all this stuff. I mentioned in the book, the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. That's what he said. Slow down.
I still have to remember that I'm doing a retreat this August and I was doing a tasting on Saturday. And the business partner that I have for the retreat, she's like, what were you on the first like hour and a half? And I'm like, nothing. She's like, you came in and you had like 30 million ideas. I just put up a video and I'm like, I'm going to let her talk to herself and then I'll watch this. And I'm like, oh yeah. I was really excited and I didn't sleep last night. So I have a lot of excess energy. And then that night I said, I have to go home early. Why? And I'm like, I didn't sleep last night. I need to sleep tonight.
Yeah.
So like it's recognizing those things, but I do.
That's what it is. You get to a point where you do recognize those things. And
you recognize those. Yeah.
It's beyond coping. It's solving anything that's going to happen.
Yep.
Beyond coping.
But I have to constantly, and I was going to ask you, one of my biggest things if I'm in the present or in the past, I'm not able to function, and I have to constantly remind myself to come to the present moment. So like I'm showering and what do I have to do today? Stop. Just wash your hair. Stop thinking about 20 million things that you want to do.
Right, yeah, one thing
at a time.
You have to condition yourself to do that.
Oh yeah, and our society doesn't
no, they
support that.
They want things yesterday. That's what my husband always says to me.
That's why I always wonder.
My husband says, you want things yesterday. That's what he says. That's his way of saying it.
Wait, so I have a question. Is he naturally more like slower? Obviously.
My husband is very focused.
Okay.
Very, very focused. He has to be, and he's always like learning new medications that come out. He has everything on his phone. He's got everything down. He's also lived, and it's in the book, he's lived through 4 episodes. So in the epilogue, I said that he is really tuned in because he's lived through it with me.
Yeah.
He knows what it is. Other doctors don't necessarily live through it.
That's why I was
very educated. Through me, he's very educated.
It has to give him a more of an edge with his patients, because
absolutely. I mean, he says to his patients, "Have you slept?" How many doctors say that? How's your sleeping? How's your eating?
See, the eating is the one thing that nobody asks about, because it goes away immediately, your appetite, and nobody focuses on that.
I would go days without eating.
Well, that was like, my friends thought I was on cocaine at first, and I'm like, no. And then they started to realize, they're like, you don't eat. I'm like, I'm just not hungry. And it's that. So like, I remember, like, I have a list of things, and that's something I have to like constantly check in with, because when I'm too excited about something, I forget to eat. And I'll go in, and that day I'm like, did I have lunch? Did I have breakfast? Oh my God, I didn't have lunch.
You know what? I keep lists. I know it's crazy, but I keep a list.
No. I have three calendars. One calendar is my, like, what I have for work. One calendar is what I need to do for my personal well-being, just so that I can show up and not tell you you're a crazy person. And the next one is of random thoughts that I like, will randomly like, oh, I have to call so-and-so. Oh, so-and-so. And
do you also keep a journal?
I do. I journal every morning and every night.
Yeah, I also, I've come to that conclusion too by writing my book. I think it's really important to keep a journal.
Do you meditate? That was my next question.
My meditation is through my artwork.
Oh man.
Through my painting.
I would love to see you just in that state.
Painting, but lately though, I've painted less because I wrote a fiction book. I wrote a book called From Russia.
Ooh.
It's about it's fiction around my great-grandfather, who came from St. Petersburg to America to play the flute in John Philip Sousa's band.
Oh my God.
I develop a fiction story all around it. And the heroine of the story is his Russian fiance. And now
oh my gosh.
And now I'm on part 2. I'm on the 2nd volume of that book. It ends, and then I have another, it's like a series. I have another.
Ooh, oh, Ruth.
So I kind of developed my writing through writing the memoir. I kind of developed a process of writing and editing and writing and editing. So I've been doing that, and also each of my paintings have poems. So I also write the poems, that you saw in the book.
That was, so you have a lot of realism in your art, but I also feel like it's almost left up to the imagination to complete the message.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of messages you could take away from the work. Based on my experiences and all that I've been through, kind of shaped my endeavors of art.
Oh wow, beautiful.
There's an element of humor in them.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of looking at what you have right now in your background, and I'm just like,
this is my basement here.
Wow.
Yeah. I have paintings all over my house.
I love the lion with the bird. You have such a way of capturing. I'm like, part of me feels like there's like, you're going to just come up with this book and it's going to be all paintings, but they're going to tell a story.
Yeah.
Like just with how everything is. I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping this up because I know we've been chatting for a while. So you
Okay.
have a lot of magical things that you're working on right now with this
Yes.
new kind of book series. Where can people follow along, kind of join you on your journey, keep in touch
Um,
with you,
I
connect
do
with
have a
you?
website. My website has some of my artwork on there, a poem with a painting, a statement, my resume, and also I have media who's interviewed me and things like that. And yeah, and my book, you could purchase the book through my website. It's on Amazon, and it's also on Barnes and Nobles. I think it's in Target and Walmart, but the Amazon and Barnes and Nobles is on the website.
Okay.
So, you could follow me there. Um, I don't have a blog to follow everything. I can't do everything.
Oh no, that's fine. Are you on any social medias, or are you like, no, that's too much for me?
I have a home Facebook.
Okay.
I'm on Pinterest. My artwork is on Pinterest, and it's on Instagram. I have an
Okay.
Instagram. So they could just look up my name, Ruth Poniarski.
All right. I will be
My
tagging that
website,
all.
yeah, my website is ruthponiarski.com. Do you want me
Okay.
to spell it?
You can. I'll also share this on the show notes so people can go ahead and click on it, but definitely go feel free.
Yes, RuthPoniarski.com.
Perfect.
Everything's on there.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Ruth's book. I feel like this book, even if you don't struggle with a mental illness or any mental disorders, I feel like, just like we were talking about, this book really, really does justice to just getting to know yourself, because I feel like that's what the book is about. It's the journey to self, and not, you don't judge yourself, Ruth. And that was one thing that I just had to applaud you for. There's so much love and compassion for, different phases of you in the past. And a lot of the time, and I include myself, sometimes I look at old versions of me and I hold judgment towards her instead of just having love and compassion towards her. So thank you for a beautiful book, for sharing your time and energy with us. And I can't wait to see what else you come up with.
Yeah, we'll have to keep in touch.
We'll definitely keep in touch. It's great chatting with you, and I
It
can't
was
wait to see
great.
this.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Ruth. All right, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I will see you again next week with a new episode of The Journey Within. Take care. Bye.